recording? Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you everybody for coming today. This is the We Are Here Stories of Resilience panel. And this is our second event in the series. February marks the start of Black History Month, which is a federally recognized celebration of the contributions Africans and African Americans have made to this country. And it's a time to reflect on the continued struggle for racial justice. And it's very often that Black history is taught from a white-centered perspective. Especially at this time, organizations often try to celebrate Black History Month with Black history themed meals, lectures, quizzes, and sometimes brands even roll out major clothing, television specials, and other content for consumers. And a lot of the time, it is presented without context. So here is some context about Black History Month. Carter G. Woodson, known as the father of Black history, developed Black History Month. Woodson, whose parents were enslaved, was an author historian and the second African-American to earn a PhD at Harvard University. He actually established it as a week in 1926, and it was intended to showcase everything that students had learned about Black history throughout the school year. It wasn't until 50 years later, in 1976, during the height of the Civil Rights Movement, that Woodson had the week expanded when Gerald Ford expanded the week into Black History Month. And Woodson chose the second week of February to coincide with the birthdays of Frederick Douglass, a famed abolitionist who escaped from slavery, and President Abraham Lincoln, who formally abolished slavery. We continue to grapple with the societal impacts of anti-Blackness, protests against racism, rising anti-Asian bias, ethnic and religious tolerance across the country, and our founding as a land-grant university with historical ties to dispossessed Indigenous land. Obviously, there's only so much that can be covered in an hour, but it's important to recognize that there's still so much that we have to learn about power, oppression, racism, Black agency, perseverance and resistance, Africa and African diaspora, Black joy and Black love, Black identities, and Black excellence. My role is to guide conversation and give us the ability to reflect. I'm not an expert on the subjects being discussed, and that's why we're here today, hear from three incredible people who are here to share their stories and help us celebrate Black history from Black perspectives, their unique viewpoints based on their lived experiences, living and working in a world and society plagued by racial inequity. It's my sincere hope that everyone here is able to learn something today and that we'll all leave here a little bit more inspired and resilient about the future. Without further ado, I want to introduce our panelists for today. First, we have Professor Tyrell Stewart Harris. Tyrell Stewart Harris is a lecturer in management communication at the Cornell School of Hotel Administration, where he teaches the first-year management communication course. He earned a PhD in English with a concentration in rhetoric and composition from the University of Illinois at Chicago. His research interests include writing, pedagogy, housing policy, and marketing. Prior to teaching at Cornell, Stewart Harris was an assistant professor in the Department of Writing at Ithaca College. Next, we have Alejandra Paulino. Just give me one moment, please. All right, so next we have Alejandra, and Alejandra is a third-year student who identifies as first-generation Afro-Latina and uses the pronouns she, her, hers. Alejandra is co-chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Business Advisory Council, Executive Vice President of La Asociación Latina, Secretary of Sabor Latino Dance Ensemble, Director of Mentorship for the National Society of Minorities in Hospitality, and is currently a TA for the Business Case of Diversity and Inclusion course. Within all of her various involvements on campus, she continues to amplify the voices of BIPOC voices who have long been silenced. Last, but certainly not least, we have JT Baker. JT Baker is from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and is currently a senior within the School of Hotel Administration. As well as being on the Cornell football team, JT also has the distinct honor and privilege to serve as a member of the Cornell University Board of Trustees. Throughout his time at Cornell, JT has been committed to using all of his platforms to increase diversity and inclusion throughout our campus, and he's planning to work for JP Morgan upon graduating in May. What incredible panelists we have, right? They have so much knowledge, and I'm so excited for them to share with us. So let's get right into it. The very first question we have is, when was a time that you have advocated for difficult conversation or even faced hostility for an identity that you have? How did you overcome these challenges? And feel free to just unmute yourself and answer.
I guess I can go. I don't really I don't know. Okay, so I remember when I first arrived on campus, I was undecided under the College of Agriculture and Life Science. So I really had no passion on what I had, like what I came to the school to study. But, you know, coming from, I identify as Afro Latinx. So coming from a Latinx collectivist household, like my mom said, you needed to be a doctor. And then I took bio and PSP, which is the pre-freshman summer program. And then that's when I knew that that wasn't the life for me. And so I further started talking to my advisor that I got through cows. And I pursued to ask him, like, I want to transfer into Dyson or the hotel school, right? And he told me, hey, like, you're not going to get in and you should pursue the major that you came here to get. So I was like, okay, like, this is my first time feeling the imposter syndrome. Like, my own advisor is telling me I'm not going to get into a school that I truly found a passion for actually trying to transfer in. And so it's like, you're not going to get in. I wouldn't even do it. Maybe you should pursue something else. And so I took it upon myself to, like, not visit him anymore, go to the Wadi office, since I'm also an HEOP scholar. Then I met Victor, and then I met Erin, and I ended up at the hotel school. So I guess that was a time where I faced, like, hostility, because it seemed like he didn't know how to help me, or he thought that because of the identity that I hold, maybe it seemed like I wasn't going to get into the school, especially coming from a really underprivileged high school. And so never did I once receive a congratulations from him. And I know he knows I transferred out. So yeah.
Well, definitely good on you, Alejandra. I appreciate you sharing with us. Professor or JT, do you have anything else that you want to add to that?
I'll let Professor go first if he has anything.
Oh yeah, I'm trying to give you all space because I will talk forever. But I would say, yeah, a lot of those, especially with, a lot of experiences kind of advocating for things, especially as a member of the faculty at different schools. I haven't done much at Cornell just because I came here and then COVID happened, right? But in my last job, I was working at Ithaca College, and it's a predominantly white institution, predominantly. Actually, I don't know if it feels like it's predominantly wealthier. I'm not sure how much of that is true because I don't, you know, poll the students on how much money they have. But the faculty mirror that a lot. So the department I was in was almost entirely white liberal. And, one thing that white liberals tend to do when they get together in a group is come up with the most racist ideas possible. And so, there was a time there where I was in my second year in the position, and my wife was about to give birth to our son. And I remember I had to go in, rush in for a meeting because they were trying to create a segregated hiring pool. Yeah, this was like the idea they came up with, was it was going to be a good way to hire people, is to come up with this like segregated subordinate position, right? So they wanted to hire people of color, but they didn't want to give them actual jobs. So they were like, yeah, we could get somebody in, and we could tell them that they'll do a little bit less work for less money, and it won't lead to a position, but we'll be training them, right? That job offers no kind of I mean, just the way that department was set up, there's no training or anything like that. Also, a position like that is illegal. And so, I'm in a meeting with 30 I think 30 white faculty, and then there's two or three of us who are not who are people of color. And I'm explaining to them why this doesn't make sense, why it's not good, what the problem is. And it's all the usual stuff you would expect. So like, oh, we just can't find anybody qualified. If there were more people like you out there, you happen to be exceptional. And I was like, well, and I said at the time, I was like, I noticed you all use this because I was hired through um their pre-doctoral diversity program, because the departments have a very hard time hiring people of color. And so one of the things they say there all the time is like, well, we found you. And it's like, you didn't actually find me. The school did that first, because you all would have messed up the process. And then they talk about exceptionalism. And I say, you know, it's interesting that you all talk about exceptionalism with your faculty of color, or, you know, people you're going to hire for the segregated position. But I've never heard anybody say one of the white faculty had to be exceptional, right? And so it was a whole argument with them. And, you know, it didn't have a positive result. They didn't listen to me. They didn't learn anything. And what ended up happening was they tried to go ahead with this project they'd made up that they were never asked to do. And when it got escalated to the dean level, you know, that was finally where the dean was like, yeah, that's illegal. Can you all stop? And so, you know, that's a very, I would say that's a very common experience when you go to work and you try to advocate for things. One of the nice things about it, though, is, you know, that kind of stuff generally does not have any impact on the lives of white professionals. And so there's no retaliation. They don't remember, they don't care. They just move on to the next thing. That's the nice part. You can always kind of advocate for yourself or for things you care about. And generally there's very little repercussion to it. But then there's very little chance that a lot changes unless you have a mass of people with you.
Thank you, Professor, for that. I resonate a lot with that. One of the biggest things that I do at Cornell is I have the privilege of serving on the Board of Trustees, and there's only a handful of Black trustees on the board. So there's 64 trustees, and you know that we just got a couple of new trustees in, but I'm saying the trustees of color, specifically African American, are less than, let's say, 6, right? So there's not a lot of representation on the board, and there's not a lot of times that experience of Black and Brown students are being specifically brought up at the trustee level, right? And the Board of Trustees are ultimately the people who run our entire university, right? From financially, from a decision-making standpoint, from an academic standpoint, all facets of our university. So it's really the most powerful room at Cornell. And during my first term on the board, in my first kind of couple months, I really found myself uncomfortable advocating on behalf of, you know, not only students who look like me, but my own self, right? I can only talk from one perspective, right? I only know Cornell through J.T. Baker's eyes, and that is a young Black man. And I would oftentimes have to advocate to a room full of, quite frankly, white, older men, right? In their 50s and 60s and 70s, who are very affluent, very wealthy, and in a way they can be disconnected from the realities of, let's say, you know, a middle class or low income Black student. You just live totally different lives. So when I was bringing these issues up of racism and the fact that I was from Minneapolis, Minnesota, where George Floyd was murdered, in my community this spring, and for example, I kind of talked about police brutality. And it was surprising to see the number of people in the room who had no idea that police brutality was a thing, right? Or why is it when you get pulled over, JT, you automatically feel anxious or you feel nervous, right? You know, you're a Cornell student, you play football, you're in the hotel school, you're going to be working for JP Morgan, right? You're a trustee. You don't do anything wrong. Why do you have to feel nervous? But they don't understand is that regardless of all those accomplishments and those communities and spaces I'm in, someone who doesn't know me just sees a Black man, right? And that's scary to some people. That frightens and puts fear into people because of the color of my skin. And a routine traffic stop can turn into a very deadly situation for someone in my position just because I'm Black. So there was this disconnect. It wasn't really hostile, right? They were open, but I had to really kind of persuade them to see life through a lens of my own, right? And I think that was one of the first obstacles I've ever had in life where I really had to kind of persuade and convince people that there's a different side of America than what they see. And now, like I said, I think the Board of Trustees are very open-minded. They're very forward-thinking people. So once I was able to lay everything out and kind of tell them what my experiences were, that started to change people's perspective. But initially it was hard, right? Because it was an uncomfortable conversation. It was one that people tend to not want to have, right? Especially when you don't have to deal with those things. And being the only Black person in the room, or one of the only Black people in the room, the only Black student, I had to literally face that challenge kind of on my own, right? And sometimes it's hard, but I know that one, you know, with this being predominantly hoteliers, when you're trying to be a leader in life, which we all will be because we're in the hotel school, is sometimes you have to take stances that may feel a little uncomfortable, that may feel a little pressure, but in the long run, it's going to help more people. And that's what you have to do. So I think that's my first experience of that. I know I gave a long-winded answer, but I love that question, by the way. So thank you.
Thank you all for sharing. I really appreciate that. So the next question I have is, what actions can we as members of the hospitality community embed into our lives to advance racial equity?
I'll start. You know, I would say one thing that's interesting about is what is right. Hospitality is about service and inclusion by default, right? You're not going to have a successful organization or group if people don't feel like your environment is hospitable, right? Nobody wants to stay at a hotel or go to a restaurant or do these things where they feel they don't belong or they feel insulted. And I think one of the most important things that we can do is remind people of that, because a lot of people aren't thinking about it through that way, right? Like, you're in the hospitality field, which means you should be concerned with people feeling welcomed, essentially, right? And that's not going to solve all the problems, but that's the start, where I see a lot of people just overlook that. They're like, yeah, hospitality, I'm going to go get a job. And it's like, no. The foundation of that is a certain type of, welcomeness and inclusion. And as we've seen, the changes in society over the last 50 years, 50, 60 years since the end of the civil rights movement, it's been the organizations that have adapted to inclusion and making space for other people. Those are the ones that are successful, right? So, I mean, yeah, you can run a business that's, exclusive, sure, but you're not going to do as well. You're not going to perform as well. You're not going to have an impact on your community if you start from that place of exclusion, right? And so I think that what I try to do is remind people of that when issues come up, right? Or looking at, like, this semester in my class, we're going to look at case studies that are about instances of segregation and discrimination and that in the hospitality industry. And that's important because if a student is saying to me, I feel uncomfortable about this topic, it's like, well, then what are you going to do when you go to work? And what kind of privilege is your discomfort with, for example, the topic JT was talking about? What does that say about you and the kind of organization you're going to run for? And, are you somebody that Alejandra is going to want to hire in the future when she's got her own company? No, because you were too afraid to deal with this topic in a classroom. You got to get over that, right? You have to really think about how you can make space for other people. Because what's the worst thing that's going to happen? You'll learn something, So that's my thing, is just really making people really think about what hospitality actually means.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. Alejandra or JT, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I would like to add just really, as hospitality leaders, encompassing, right, the fact that we serve all people, kind of what Professor said, and but thinking through a really critical and intentional way of doing that, right? So understanding people's backgrounds, understanding people's perspective. That's the name of hospitality, right? We all feel good when you go into a hotel and you see a note card with your name, right? Welcome Abby or welcome JT, and they put a little chocolate, they personalize it, right? That's knowing your customers. Also, you can know customers' backgrounds. You can know what's right, what's wrong, right? For example, I'm not trying to bring up any like really hard topics, but a couple months ago, right, it was called the Soho Karen, right? I'm sure all of you kind of seen the video of there's a white woman in the lobby who accused a young Black teenager that he stole her phone. In reality, he did it. And she physically assaulted him and verbally attacked him and his father. And the hotel managers in the video, the staff, really did nothing to aid that young Black man, right? So the first thing I said is, okay, I'm in the hotel school. If that was my hotel, if I owned that hotel, I would have never let that happen, right? Now, things happen, right? People steal things every day in hotels, bad things happen in hotels. So I wouldn't have just been unbiased to the fact that maybe the young man may have stole her phone, but I wouldn't have just outright accused him or let that other guest attack another one of my guests without knowing the full story, right? I would have been able to intervene and I would have took two sides into account. But I believe because he was Black, the hotel staff did not do that. They automatically sided with the white woman. And that's why that it got the media attention it did and it blew up, right? So I think that being intentional and really trying to serve all people is what we need to do as hospitality leaders. And not to put her on the spot, but I see Professor Heather just is on the call, right? And I'm in her food insecurity class. So learning about, right, we're in food and beverage. We learn all year long, right, how to make money in food and beverage, right? How to get profit margins, how to be successful, how to run a good restaurant. But then on the flip side, we never talk about the people who can't go to a restaurant, right? Or the people who don't even have access to food. And as real hospitality leaders, we can't only see the advantage of trying to make money off people, but we also have to think of how do we help people on the lower spectrum. And that's why I really I'm so glad she has that course this year and I'm in it and just to learn, right? Because it's one thing to be successful and make a positive, stance for your family, build wealth and all these other great things, but it's also our duty to also help people who may be less fortunate, right? And use our resources to make the world a better place. And as hospitality leaders, I think that we need to do that. So again, I know I gave you a lot, but it was just two real world examples that I wanted to kind of throw out there.
Great, thank you, definitely. All right, I'm gonna move on to the next question, if that's okay. How did you find a community to share these challenges and experiences with, if you found one? I know Alejandra is on so many different organizations at Cornell. Would you like to start?
Yeah, of course. So I wouldn't necessarily say I found my community just because I'm part of La Asociación Latina and I've been in La Asociación Latina's e-board since freshman year. But it's still quite difficult to say that they're like my community because the Latinx community is so divided and there's this continuous anti-Blackness that lives in our community, and it's a continuous conversation that we have to have. Like, for example, my mom, she does not identify as a Black woman. She would never say that she's Black. She would just say she's straight up Dominican. But the idea behind this is because of the culture that we grew up in. And so this anti-Haitians in the Dominican Republic with Trujillo as our dictator that divided the Dominicans and the Haitians. And so that's why it continues to be something that we have continued to fight for. And especially with being at Cornell, I've seen that divide. And when I first arrived on campus, actually, there was La Asociación Latina's barbecue and then Black Life on the Hill. And both of these events were on the same day at the same time, literally in two different places. So it felt as though I had to like choose my identity. Like, okay, I had to either be at the Latinx barbecue or I had to be at the Black Lives on the Hills barbecue. But I couldn't be at both at the same time, or I couldn't. And so one thing that we're doing now through LAL is that we've actually been able to talk to BSU and talk to the president of BSUs now and be able to have these events separately, of course, because there's people that identify as both. So that's one thing that we've done, but I wouldn't necessarily say like I found my community. It's still something I struggle with, and it's still like conversations that we continue to hold.
It's a great example. Thank you for sharing. Professor JT, anything else you would like to share? All right, so our next question is a little bit more intense. So, especially considering the consistent expectations of BIPOC or Black, Indigenous, and people of color to make white people comfortable, how can we challenge white supremacy in the roles that we hold? Professor, would you like to start?
Oh, okay, I'm unmuted. I think that's a super good question, right? Like, I would say, even though this will sound like it goes against my hospitality thing, but I think that, being hospitable and making people comfortable in this sense can be two different things. But yeah, it starts with not making white people comfortable. I mean, you know, if you look at American history, you look at even the last election, that kind of comfort for white people doesn't end up anywhere positive, right? Like, you know, Trump was president, he was doing whatever he wanted, and it was the same level of complaining and blaming and, you know, other people's, it's always somebody else's fault, right? Dude is running a government where he's got control of every aspect of it, loses an election, and it's always somebody else's fault. So, you know, I think that it starts with saying, you know, I'm not going to make you comfortable about these kinds of issues and just proceeding with the way that you have to live. And again, it's about that's that kind of comfort or that feeling that, you know, white people should be comforted is a huge part of white what's the word, privilege, sorry. And so once you start to just not play into that, you know, it forces people to think about their position in life. It causes them to really consider more, and it's difficult, right? They can make your life difficult, but doing the opposite will also make your life difficult in the same ways. It'll just be delayed by a week or two, right? And so I think that's the place that you start. The second one is, you know, you have to really go out and start putting yourself in places where you're not supposed to be. And I mean, you know, you join those groups like JT's talking about, he's on the board of trustees as the only Black student there, right? But that's where, you know, you make a space for yourself, and then that makes a space for other people. And then when you can move into these places, you can start to advocate for others. You can start to see demographic shifts there. You know, every job I've had where I had a position of power, I go into an area and then all of a sudden I find what happens is other people of color show up, right? They come there, they start participating in the space, they start hanging out. And then the demographics of that space starts to change, right? Whether I can end up hiring people or just now it's like this was formerly an all white space on, like I used to run a lot of writing centers. And so it'd be, I'd show up and then more people are like, oh, look, there's a Black guy there. I wonder if this thing has changed before. And so then more people come in, and then, you know, as people come in, you talk to them, you meet them, it's like, oh, you should do this job too. And then you hire them. And then that changes the demographics of the students who come in, and it keeps changing the application pool that you get, right? And then that leads to, that's a way that you can start huge change on a small level, right? Yeah, that's my answer for now. I'll stop there.
Great. No, I definitely agree with that. Definitely having people be accountable, and I definitely just absolutely agree with that. JT or Alejandra, is there anything else that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I would like to add something really quick. So the question kind of stated, what can white people do, right, to end white supremacy? And I think the first thing is realize it, right? It's a real thing. And it's kind of shocking, like another board of trustees example, right? I had to really kind of inform people that racism is a real thing, right? So I experienced racism. After being at Cornell, all the things I do, I experience racism every single day, right? And I heard one comment like, former President Barack Obama, like he's a Black man that's never faced racism. No, Obama was the president of the United States of America, and he still faced racism every single day, right? So there's this notion of some people really believe that racism isn't a thing. Systematic racism isn't a thing, right? Being prejudiced or oppression isn't a thing. And it is, it's a real thing. So that's step one, right? I think that I would challenge all of my white peers and white people in the industry, and I talk to a lot of industry leaders. You have to acknowledge that racism is a real thing, and it has disproportionately disadvantaged a lot of people throughout our history. The second thing is try to do something about it, right? Have a conversation with someone. Get to know their story. Get to know and see what it's like walking in their shoes. And an example, it's a little extreme, but as a young Black man coming into Cornell, there was not a lot of people who looked like me. I have never had a Black professor at Cornell except Professor Miller, who does food and beverage, right? 1 out of 4 years I've been in the hotel school. And when I came in, I used to be, they would say in finance or hotel operations, pick a group, everyone, And I look around and I'd be the only Black kid in the class, or me and my friend Eric Gorman would be the only two Black kids in the class. And somehow every time me and Eric would have to pair with each other because a lot of our peers, would go with their friend groups. Man, I don't think it was intentional, but people stick with who they're most comfortable with, but in a way that alienates other people. For example, the two Black kids were in the class of 60 white students. So I would just challenge you to think, what if it was the reverse, right? Like, what if a white person that was on this screen went to Howard University in Washington, D.C., an all Black school, right? And you were the one white student in the class of 70 Black students. You would want those Black students to feel welcoming. You would want them to feel like you're a part of the class, to help you, to engage with you, so you get the most out of your educational experience as well, right? And it's not saying that people do things that, you hang out with people who are in your circles, right? If you're in a sorority or fraternity or athletes, I get that. But I'm just saying, sometimes I've really seen, especially at Cornell, my white peers may not take that initial step to say, okay, well, let me find out more about his story or her story, or let's invite them to come sit with me at Max or Terrace, right? Where opposite of the way, I have to do that every day, or else I won't eat lunch with anyone, right? Because there's only a few other Black kids, right? So if I don't eat lunch with someone who doesn't look like me, then I don't eat lunch. I eat lunch by myself every day. Where a white student may not have to think, just intentional, realize that there's disadvantages, and realize that there's a gap between our country right now and between people, and it takes leaders like everyone on the screen to close it, right? But you have to be intentional with it every single day.
That's a great example. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. Alejandra, is there anything you'd like to add? Otherwise, I can move on to the next.
I would just like to add one quote that I heard during our DBAC recruitment panel this Friday. She stated that when you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. And that just summarizes JT experience and Professor Harris, I want to say, his experience. So that quote just like really resonated with a lot of what we were just talking about. So that's a little quote that I wanted to share.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It was a great panel. Highly recommend. Anyway, this panel is titled, "We Are Here to Assert the Fact that no matter how many times people are pushed back or marginalized or found struggling, you get back up again." When was a time that you had to get back up again and assert your presence?
Yeah, so I would like to start. So I would say just recently, actually, I don't know, when the hotel school didn't acknowledge Black History Month. I think that really triggered me and it really bothered me, because after the conversations that we had over the summer, they were like, we're just trying to be super inclusive and Black Lives Matter and all these little conversations we had, but yet still you take the 28 days that are for Black students and you use it to still acknowledge your white students. We only get 28 days and the white people get 365 to the hotel school. And so when I was like, I woke up and I saw this post and I'm like, oh my God, it's Black History Month. So I DM'd them and I'm like, me and my friend DM'd them and we were like, so where's your Black History Month acknowledgement or post? And they were like, here's your sorry response. I'm so sorry that we don't have your post. We love our Black students. And so they basically used the same excuse that they used over the summer with the Black Lives Matter and responding to Black Lives Matter. And so I felt like that was the time where I was like, we have to continue to fight for our presence here at Cornell. Well, specifically in the hotel school where it's like really small, we have to continue to fight for our presence. And it's something that we have to do here in the university itself. So the fact that I have to do it at the hotel school and them not having to them not acknowledging us, it's just something that I find triggering. And they posted it, I guess, the 15th, but it was too late. But it was a time where it was like, okay, we had to come back up and assert that we're here again. And it's our time to shine, I guess. We have 28 days.
That's a really great point. And, they sent out that email and I was even telling Professor K, and like, as soon as that email, I was like, I sent this, but didn't look like they spell checked it because they misspelled Barack Obama. And it's like, it's the little things that matter, you know? It's especially important because if you're sending out a delayed message, it should be one that takes a lot of time and thought, and that definitely needs some work. JT and Professor, is there anything else that you'd like to add? All right, well, I can move on. So how do you deal with microaggressions?
Okay, I can start on this one. This is a good one. And I kind of try to always, so when I deal with a microaggression, I don't necessarily get angry or upset, depending on what it is. But I always try to make a learning lesson out of it, right? So let's say I'm with a professor and she or he says something that, you know, may be a microaggression to me as a student, as a Black student, right? I wouldn't necessarily automatically assume they did that on purpose or intentionally, but maybe they did it unknowing or in a form of ignorance, right? So I would tell them, right? I would say, hey, professor or doctor, your comment in class made me feel uncomfortable because of this, or that wasn't right because of that, or a student, right? And I'll do it in a real calm manner, not in a accusing way or trying to demean them, but just let them know. But then in the end, you know, so now for a lesson kind of in my mind, I'm only going to do that once though, right? I'm only going to kind of give you the benefit of the doubt once. So if it happens a second time or a third time, now I'm going to think you're doing it intentionally, right? And you want to be harmful to me or kind of demeaning to myself. So I would challenge a lot of people, and sometimes people don't give people second chances, right? I always think people deserve a second chance. I think always people deserve opportunity to be educated. So that's what I would pose all of us on the screen to do, right? When you hear a microaggression, just take the time to correct someone and let them know that it's a microaggression because they may not even know. But also give them the tools needed to correct it. And if you see it again, it's not corrected, then you can kind of know that maybe they're doing it intentionally or there's some underlying issues and maybe you have to go to, you know, an administrator or whatever you have to do to take care of it. But just always try to make it a learning lesson, and that's how we're going to get better as a whole community.
Thank you for sharing.
My last
go ahead.
I'll also add, not even as a Black student, I think it's the most powerful when a white student helps correct another white student on something that may have been insensitive or not necessarily correct. That's powerful. When I've seen things like that in life, that's what really I sit back and say, okay, this is meaningful change, right? Because it's one thing for the oppressed person to say it, right? That's not right. But for someone who isn't oppressed, right? And that kind of goes back to my statement on Professor Heather's class, right? For someone who may go own 20 restaurants in my lifetime, right? For me to care about the people who have deal with issues with food insecurity or don't have enough to eat, that's empowering, right? Because usually the people who don't have anything to eat, they're the ones who are advocating, like, please help the community. We need stuff to eat. We need resources. We need platforms. But it should be the wealthy people, the people who have more than what they need, advocating on behalf of them. So that goes to my example. When a white peer corrects another white peer, that's when it gets really, really good and real form change starts to happen.
Thank you. Yeah, you're absolutely right there. Professor and Alejandra, is there anything you'd like to add? Okay. So my next question is one that was DM'd to me. So all of you know, obviously this event is held by HEC. And what I do in HEC is I'm the Impact and Inclusion Director, and my role is essentially to help guide and make HEC a more accessible place for everyone. Not only that, but I'm trying to make it more inclusive in that HEC has an impact and leaves a legacy for other students, especially those who are marginalized. So looking upon that, what change would you like to see in the hotel school?
I think the hotel school has a lot of work to do. Personally, I haven't had conversations on DEI in any class but human resources. So I think the curriculum changed. I also been to take that class. So the Fridays, Hotel Fridays, that leadership class with the dean, DDLS, right? Yeah, and I was sitting in every single Friday class that we had. I realized that all these speakers were white, and all these speakers had a background in hospitality, or their parents owned 50 restaurants and their parents owned 50 hotels. And I'm over here like, my mom didn't even go to college, my dad didn't even finish high school, so where do I fit in here, you know? And so those constant conversations, it was just overwhelming, because I'm sitting here, oh my God, you have so much privilege. I don't know what I can do in this school. And so I do feel that, I think this is changing now, because I saw the speakers for this year, and they're a lot more diverse, a lot more from different places, and I resonate with my background or my identity. And so I think they're changing that. And I think that's one of the ways that I appreciate the hotel school for doing, and hearing from my experience, because I shared this with Victor. I was like, Victor, I don't even know where I fit in this school. This is a mess. And so I think that's where my first experience in DDLS, where I felt like the imposter syndrome for real, because I was like, I'm just like hearing about people's privilege, and like there were students here that I didn't even know their parents owned like the Marriott or whatever. So I think that's where it starts. And I think continuing to have these conversations in all of the classes that we have is definitely a start, because it can be applied anywhere, not just human resources.
I just want to say, as a new faculty, that's really helpful for me to hear. You know, I don't have any power on campus, so it's not a ton I can do. But, you know, I think that one of the big things that's important is like that you have faculty who are aware of these things when they come in, so that it's not just the, I think as JT said earlier, and as you are mentioning now, so that it's not just the course material, but also, you know, like how can you ground that at least some part in the reality of the world, right? So that people are thinking about it, especially since, again, this kind of stuff should be built into hospitality already. And I think the other part is the school expanding its recruitment efforts, right, to get a more representative student body, right, and think about students from all kinds of backgrounds who could benefit from this kind of program and could be leaders in their communities, right? And I think that, yeah, it's nice. It's always good to have you know, people who are already accomplished, or they come from a background that's already great, so that they can continue their dynasty or whatever. But if you really want to impact the community, you have to, as you're saying, like, you know, find the people who represent your, you know, students who are first generation, students who, it's the same thing. So like, I'm a first generation student. My parents were working class. Maybe for a while my mom was a bus driver. She worked in a McDonald's for a long time, and then for some reason got our family from banned from working at McDonald's. That's a long story. You know, whatever. But you know, it was all the things that you were all talking about, all stuff I had to do, you know, before there was the internet like there is now, right? So you know, it was the same thing, like learn how to use college, learn how to go through these things, look for people who look like me or represented me, and, you know, kind of find the way to navigate through and give back to the community. And I think that any school that can make that easier for their students from any background, right, is going to be a better program. Because a lot of times, your quote was perfect, the equality feels like oppression, right? And the thing with this is, if you ever look into research on racism and segregation and these kinds of things, it's super expensive and it hurts everybody, right? There's nobody who actually benefits from racism and discrimination and segregation. It makes everything worse for all of us. And so the more you can do to make a school inclusive for the students on the bottom, the better it makes the school for the students on the top, right? The better it makes it for everybody. And so I always feel like that should be a huge incentive for any program.
Yeah, and one more thing, I feel like conversations on Black Lives Matter also have to be something that the hotel school does, especially with here in February, where the MMH students, they posted like the Black Afro woman around the board, and it was like on construction paper. And then the white people felt attacked by an Afro, so they had to take it down. I don't know if you guys remember that, but it was like the room right next to Max, the MMH student room, where they had like the Afro, and then the dean said that it was a fire hazard because you can't have paper like around or whatever. And so yeah, there's has to be a lot of work that the hotel school had to do, because that was a situation where we felt attacked as people of color in the hotel school. You can't even celebrate Black History Month without some artwork that you did, it being considered a fire hazard. So.
Thank you for sharing. JT, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think she just summed it up perfect. Yeah, that's disheartening.
So my next question is actually to Professor's point, in that like a lot of the time, the responsibility of advocating for DEI falls upon BIPOC people, including myself, you know, but it's something that I'm passionate about, and I've contributed a lot of my time and effort and energy into doing it because it's something that I care about deeply, obviously because I consider myself to be a member of a marginalized community. But a lot of the time that role involuntarily falls upon us. So how do you advocate for DEI with colleagues who don't understand its importance? HE, would you like to start?
I think so. So I always have a business mindset, right? Of, you know, why I came to the hotel school, where I'm going to work next year, and even on the board of trustees, I've always had a high level kind of business mindset. And my method, right, is kind of what Professor just kind of alluded to, is that not having diversity and inclusion is expensive, right? So regardless of your political views, regardless of what you think at home when the door's shut and it's just you and your family or you and yourself, I think most people understand the concept of money, right? And having more money is good, having less money is bad. I think it's just simple. And when you break it down to people from that aspect of having diversity and inclusion in companies and institutions, is actually makes your company worth more, makes your institution worth more, it's a value add, then I think people will listen. Right now, you shouldn't have to, right? One, it's off rip one, it's the right thing to do. But if they can't get with the right thing to do, then number two, it's not only the right thing to do, but it also is valuable from a financial standpoint. And number three, it's also valuable from a standpoint of publicity, right? There's a lot of consumers in the world. And I always, for example, whenever someone interviews me or a company, I go look at directly their leadership committee, right? Or their board of directors. If I don't see any people who look like me, why would I want to go work there? Right. So that means that there's no reason why I should go work there, because if I work hard for 20 years, I will never end up as an executive. I will never end up as CEO, right? Because I'm seeing it. Like, you have to be a white man to end up on the board of directors of Marriott, or, you know, that's not a good one, right? That's not a prime example, but Marriott was a company that I looked into, and they do have Black people on their board of directors, right? And they were intentional with that, where there's other hospitality companies who aren't so intentional. So I would just always say that it is less expensive, as Professor said, right? There's a value to it financially and just from a public relations standpoint, and it's the right thing to do. I would break it down like that. And if they still weren't kind of behind it, then I don't think that you need to be their colleagues, because that's not a good group to be around. So.
Alejandra, Professor, is there anything else you want to add to that? Okay, so last but not least, my final question to you is this. What is a lesson you learned or advice that you would share with your younger self? I've asked this question last time and I ask it now because I find it so formative in asking everybody I know. So I really want to hear from all three of you.
Yeah, I would say you belong. There's definitely going to be times where you have to face adversities that you would have to overcome. But at the end of the day, one of the things my advisor always says is that you're here for a reason, and there's nothing that I can say. I have to force myself to continue to think, or I might just end up struggling for the rest of my life. So just saying that you belong, and that you're here for a reason.
I love hers. That was really good. I would say mine would just be two simple ones, right? Keep grinding. I would tell my younger self, just keep working hard and keep dreaming big, big dreams, because when you put your work in and you do the right things, it'll work out, right? So I would just make sure I tell myself, no matter what, don't ever give up, keep grinding. And the second one is, I would say, keep making friends, right? Keep making friends with people I never thought would be my friend, right? Keep trying to be in uncomfortable situations and meet, the kid who sits off alone, right? Befriend that kid or befriend that student, or talk to the professor that you think is hard and doesn't understand you. Try to get to know that professor, right? So just keep making relationships, keep making friends, because then that will make your world a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, the advice so I'm old, so I think about this all the time. And the advice I would probably give myself is to treat everybody like garbage all the time, just nonstop. No, I'm kidding. That was great stuff to say. I would say, don't stress. That would be my biggest piece of advice. I don't know a single person who's ever benefited from stressing out. I mean, from watching my parents, just deteriorate their health, freaking out all the time, to thinking about myself when I was younger. And it's so many of the things I was worried about or I was scared of didn't matter, and they work out in the end. And so I would, kind of mirror what JT was saying. It's just, if you got something you want to do, just keep working on it, right? You don't even have to stress out about progress. If it's something you just want to work towards, you put in what you can, and it's gonna grow, right? It's like taking care of yourself is the same way you would take care of a plant. And then honestly, 150%, the advice I would give myself younger is to floss every day. That's not a joke. Flossing, no. People think, they don't understand. Look, your body is connected, right? And especially for people of color, one of the things that kills us is heart disease. And so if you don't floss, you get plaque buildup in your mouth, and that plaque buildup connects with your gingivitis, and it breaks off into your bloodstream and builds up in your heart. You will have a heart attack, right? And I know, and they are finding more and more healthcare issues are related to the way you take care of your mouth. So one of the best things you can do for yourself is just 2 minutes a day. And that little bit of self-care will improve your life in a way you won't even understand until you're 80 years old and you still have your teeth. Not to mention, look, you're in hospitality, you can't be running up on people with funky mouth, right? So I would definitely have started flossing about 10 years earlier. So don't stress out, and remember to floss. Those are the two most important things I would have told myself when I was younger.
That might have just been the most critical thing I learned at Cornell all 4 years. I'm gonna go floss right now, because that is crazy. I don't want to have a heart attack.
Oh yeah, look it up. No, it is insane, right? And I'll tell you the story. The reason I floss is I didn't floss. My parents weren't taking care of their teeth. I didn't know. I thought they had their teeth. I went to the dentist with my mom when I was 18, 19, 21, somewhere around there, because we had the same dentist. And the dentist told me to floss, and I was kind of being a jerk. I was like, I don't have to worry about it. My parents got their teeth. My mom went like this, missing all the teeth in the back of her mouth. Talked to my dad. He's missing a bunch of teeth. And I was like, oh, that's what happens. And my parents are, at the time, were younger people. They're not, they're not super old. And they weren't then, they were in like their 40s or something. And they don't have any teeth. And so floss, take care of your mouth. Take care of your mouth, and it'll take care of you.
I'm very glad to hear that. I actually carry floss with me all the time.
Boom.
So
Boom. Favorite.
I always carry floss and hot sauce. It's just two things I always carry with me in case I need it. I don't know why, but I do. Anyway, I just wanted to say thank you all for attending. I really appreciate all of the insights you were able to share with us. And I know that I'm definitely going to be coming away with some new advice and, a little bit of inspiration in my heart for the upcoming month. And I hope you all will join us for the third panel we'll be having on March 30th or 31st. I have to double check that. But I really, again, thank you all for coming. It was really, really insightful event, and I really appreciate all of you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank
Thank
you
you.
everyone for sharing. Thank
Thank
you.
you.